I'm sure many of you know Vladimir, teacher, contributor, and really active participant in many communities. Thanks, Vladimir.
How can we hear? Everyone hear me fine? Nathan, you're probably the furthest from me, all good? Okay, we have only half an hour, even less. So I don't want to stand in front of your morning tea, so let's go through it. The session called Lessons Learned from Teaching Drupal and Open Source in College. So I hope you're in the right session. Or whoa. All right. Big round of applause to volunteers and organizers. They're doing a great job here. Thank you for coming for DrupalSouth. Again, as I said before, without you, the event won't be possible. Quickly about me, I'm Vladimir. I live in Brisbane. I contribute and teach open source. Quick story time. 2023, which was already 2 years ago, time flies, was pretty slow. I became a certified teacher, which thing you can do with about 2 to 6 months. And I joined TAFE as a teacher. For purpose of recording, TAFE are local Australian colleges that are governed by government, and their curriculum is governed by government. So when you go to a TAFE website, it looks like you're going to become a rock star. Maybe even, I'm not sure if one of them is a teacher, but probably not. So, and all I got was a name tag. Took a while, but, in 2023, I taught different things. Not just development. Development was mostly in advanced diploma. Some of it was in diploma. But certificate is also covers things like manipulating media, social media, and a bunch of other stuff. So even using Drupal was part of the certificate. Here's my spanky new Windows desktop that I got, and my Tractors 2024 calendar. What's happening? I think I'm breathing into a microphone, so pardon the noises. So the simple exchange, I did a few industry meetings with TAFE, and the exchange was very simple. I would do a teaching experience as a paid job, and in exchange, I would also give an industry recommendation. So what does industry and me as a person running IT business, which is the Mad Elephant Studio, what do we need for TAFE to do in order to bring better qualifying people, which is obviously if you ever were recruiting someone for a development Drupal related job, you understand what I'm talking about. So I taught different open source technologies, as I mentioned before, from Drupal WordPress just as a user and administrator to things like Node.js and React, Python, C#, and .NET. So today, I'm going to share with you lessons I learned from and my recommendations after 12 months teaching for students, teachers, and IT professionals. So this session will focus on open source, on good development practices, and living in an age of generative tools. And also, I added it later, what I wish I learned in uni after looking, 15, 20 years back after graduating. I'm going to share teaching lessons. I'm going to give learning and mentoring advice not only to the teachers, but also to the industry, because eventually we all become mentors one way or another. That's the best way to learn. I'm going to provide the industry recommendation, things I actually sent to TAFE when I sent my resignation letter. Initiate the discussion, hopefully, and play Mythbusters, which are important things, especially Mythbusters if you caught the keynote. So I reckon this session would be useful to students, to teachers and mentors, to IT professionals. Let's go back 20 years ago. 2005, the year I graduated from uni, I was going to a library to get a book. By the way, if you want to get a book, go downstairs. The Varnish had book that thick. If you've seen the book before, it's actually there, and you can get it. Git was just invented, so obviously I didn't know what it was. There was no GitHub, no social media, no chatbots, and new technologies were WordPress and Drupal. Sounds cool. Let's go back in time. A couple of years before that, Steve Ballmer famously called Linux a cancer. But there were a few advances already on open source front. I'm not going to read them, but there was like Red Hat started making money, a bunch of other stuff. So, and 20 years later, where are we now? We don't really have library for IT books anymore, do we? Well, online. Git is already 20 years old and GitHub is 17 years old. Obviously, there is social media, chatbots, and what are new technologies these days? New LLM models? This article from last year about Microsoft, obviously, hello Steve Ballmer again, continued with many Linux and open source announcements, so adding to the Azure bunch of open source stuff. So what did I learn from uni? So there are a few things I learned while teaching in college. Number one, that didn't change. Proprietary vendor dominance, right? In 2005, they were given, trying to get students on MSDN library. They would send it to you on a CD or as a book. And later on, a couple of years later, they would give an online access to HTML files to get through the API documentation and so on and so forth. You would get the software as a part of the subscription as well. But this as well, like corporations like Adobe, Microsoft, Amazon, using different tactics, sometimes good, sometimes questionable, trying to get the younger generation and the new professionals onto their tools. Right? So, not saying everything is bad. Visual Studio Code, I think it's a great product from Microsoft, but still product of Microsoft. But there are alternatives as well. Alternatives like PHP Storm if you're a backend Drupal developer. So, what are the pros of proprietary vendor dominance? Student use industry tools. This is important. I'm also a sound engineer and know how important it is to use, $20,000 software that you can't access. It is important. But cons are, it sets example in the industry. People are expected to go and do Microsoft once they graduated, which I don't think it's a good idea. Even if they're exposed somehow to another technologies, and these days we're talking a lot of open source, they still think like they're probably gonna go and work for some sort of Microsoft or alternative vendor-related technology. So the question, who are the competitors to open source? And that's the answer. This is more like a mythbuster as well. And answer is always proprietary software and almost never an open source software. We might compete in things, but actually we give each other a lot of ideas. We give each other a lot of trends and ideas. So if someone asks you what's a competitor to Drupal, it's never WordPress, really. So my recommendation is for the courses or when you teach, list proprietary tools and technologies beforehand. That's the list I struggle to find. And I think it's a good idea to say, that's what you're going to learn. Make the list public so someone can give you genuine feedback, but also list open source alternatives. Number two, open source. These days, widely used. When I was coding in uni, we used Java, C++, a couple of other languages like Haskell. I'm not sure if most of them were open source. But open source these days are everywhere. Programming languages, frameworks, libraries, content management system, and other systems as well. IDEs will already look at Microsoft Visual Studio Code. And a lot of questions I get, I used to get it early from the colleagues when I just started and moved to open source, and these days from the students as well. Why is it free? It doesn't make sense to give a free software. You don't make any money out of it. We are at DrupalSouth conference, so most of you do know answer to that question. But if you don't, or if someone asks you, make sure to give them the proper answer. Like for example, first time I was asked, it was about Bootstrap framework, and said, I don't understand how you can give away so much power in CSS and JavaScript. And I said, well, what about testers? You don't pay for all those millions of testers who go in and test this thing. So make sure you talk about reusability, giving back, and testing. Those things are important because it kind of creates this natural workflow where you give back and you receive back as well. There's a great talk and a blog about givers and takers, and lots of discussions happening online that Dries, creator of Drupal, talk a bit earlier this year or last year. Yeah, have a look, but really know the answer to this question. Why are you actually using free software? Let's talk about mythbusters. Open source is not secure. I've heard that a lot for the past 20 years. I saw someone in Queensland education system blame Joomla because it's not secure, not because it was out of date and the vendor didn't update it. But then proprietary vendor came along and snapped all the schools in Queensland, the state where I'm from. ACCC blames premature TPG merger rejection reveal on unpatched CMS. So the content that the government organization published, they later blame on an unpatched CMS rather than on the processes. Like, obviously, once we go up the IT ladder, we do need to take the responsibility for the actions we take, but the blame game is always there. And trust me, if there is a blaming proprietary vendor versus blaming free open source software, you might get to see articles like this. This is from 6 years ago, but I mean, it's still there. Okay, no, open source is not popular. Well, I don't have to go jump around. You can see the numbers yourself. You can see how much open source software is used by all the cloud vendors, regardless of the cloud provider you use, including marginal ones like Alibaba. But there's also great articles that Switzerland federal government requires, releasing the software as an open source. Obviously, there's lots of stars attached to it, but it's a great step forward, and Europe was always on the forefront of driving those things. Maybe a bit slowly, but definitely further than a lot of other countries around the world. World first open source trapped ion computer revealed. Things like that. So we're now getting into the software as well. Sometimes I give an example of Tesla, how Tesla open sourced a lot of it, battery around technology in the early days. And look where regardless how you, what's your, either you like a company or not, look where we are in the EV world, electronic vehicles world. Obviously, I don't think it would be possible to get that far without Tesla doing that initial step. Open source does not pay well. This conference is probably a good example of actually saying that most of us are paid professionals, running businesses or getting some sort of money because of Drupal. So that's already a good example, but you know, go to the WordPress conference, go to another conference that covers open source, everything open, and see how many professionals are there, not even development. Obviously, Red Hat proved that myth wrong. So pros for open source. Students use industry tools. Again, a lot of the open source tools are industry tools, Visual Studio Code, but also exposed to the alternatives to proprietary systems. Cons, large competition, usually steep learning curve because of the things I'm going to mention a bit later. And actually it says here with variable documentation quality. So be prepared to push it a bit more if you learn in some sort of a technology. Some of them do have good documentation. Not all of them have bad documentation, but sometimes it is a learning curve. So yeah, and we can keep on seeing news like that, where we now seeing open sourcing AI models, which is, some might argue, is it really open sourcing, or are we actually doing something like that? Well, read the licenses of the open source, but at least the word open source is used and not in a bad content. I think it's a good news as well for the open source. So my recommendations, advocate open source. So always say there is alternative. If there is a Photoshop, there is always Corel still there, and GIMP as well. Not necessarily you're going to use it or you're going to use it at your work, but you know it's there in case you need it. Advocate by doing. Actually use open source if you can. right? I mean, if you have $7.5 billion, you can buy GitHub, but the biggest repository of the open source software. But yeah, play Mythbusters. Already said that. Number 3, that's biggest one for me. I get very angry about this thing. Source control is afterthought. How TAFE curriculum is created. Government creates a bunch of units, puts them into packages, and then it's up to TAFE to pick up those packages or create their own one and prove to the government they actually tick off the boxes, right? So you probably can see or not see the thing. So this is how unit of competency is created. And then you have a standards, and you have different elements of your course, right? And then you have your unit of competency, which basically tick off against some government unit of competency, and you get your diploma based on this unit of competency the government says you need to have a minimum number of. So again, based on those things, Git is not a requirement to graduate. You can graduate an IT course or development course without you ever using Git, which I think it's very, very bad. So good thing or not, we didn't use source control when I was in uni in 2001-2005, but straight in the first job, luckily we have Visual Source from Microsoft, where I got introduced to. But again, schools doing the same 20 years later, not acceptable. In fact, when I was in school, Git wasn't even there. Today is more than just source control as well, right? So we all know or use one of the top 3, GitLab, GitHub, Bitbucket. And these days, you can do everything from product management to security automation to just your process automation, and even these days, generative code assistance. So actions I took to actually make sure Git is more introduced. I use source control on any subject. If I ask students to grab a code snippet, I would tell them where to go and get a code snippet from one of the source control tools we use. And I also do annual address for the last 2 years. I've been doing address to the students, basically saying exactly the same thing, what I'm telling you now, more with a student spin. So my recommendations for students, obviously create an account, or for professionals as well. GitHub is a great place to just create an account and have an account there. Use often if you can. If you're not a developer, read the release notes. You are using the products that's probably on GitHub. Go and familiarize yourself. Maybe even jump on an issue queue. Bootstrap release notes are great to read. You actually know what's in a framework once you read 2 or 3 releases, especially big ones. Like great release notes there. Peruse issues, you don't have to go and fix them. In fact, a lot of them would be a gibberish, but at least you will learn where to go, how to find it. Do you even know where the issues button in GitHub is? I don't use GitHub often, I use GitLab more often. So every time I go to GitHub, I actually struggle to find the issues button. Imagine a person who never used it, how are they gonna do it? And different technologies have first-timers issues. Drupal has first-timers issues tag. WordPress has first-timers issues tag. If you have other technology like Django or something and know a bit more, let me know. I want to add more stuff in Python and Go and other things as well. So people can actually go, and if they use specific technology, they can go and start doing it. Documentation, rules, but reading these days becoming a skill. Someone asked me at the meetup where I can learn about WordPress, and I sent them to Pact, and they said, I don't read books. I can't really read them. Which, again, surprise, it's a skill, looks like it was always a skill, but these days it becomes actually a skill you have to enforce. For people to go and read through the articles, through the blog. That's why I read New York Times, not a Facebook, because, I'm engaging and trying to process things. But this is my personal choice. But talking about the technical documentation is different. It's a skill that you have to teach. Quality documentation is rare, but it's there. Reviewing documentation should not be an afterthought. It should be part of your plan. Successful projects have the good documentation. So when I start the project, I'm asking a few questions. Easy documentation, easy to find, easy to understand, easy to reference, and easy to follow anonymously. So technically, your documentation, like your good user story, should be testable. Your documentation shouldn't be followable. So you can follow the documentation like a tutorial. If you can't do that, if it makes no sense to read this article, it shouldn't be there. So contribute, that's the only way I see to documentation, especially for the open source project. Just review 1 page a month, 1 page a year. Easy way to start. Like you actually need to read things and use the system. You don't even need to know the code. Minimal technical knowledge required to start reviewing documentation. Again, any open source documentation. But that thing often gets neglected. So my recommendations, read, try to follow documentation, right? Release notes is a good place to start, but documentation, if you start using WordPress, read about WordPress. If you start using Drupal, read about Drupal. Update open source documentation. Write tutorials if you can. These days, I'm actually saying don't write tutorials on your personal blog. Try to update it at the source at drupal.org, and maybe write a blog at the same time. Few people did that for Drupal, doing the blog and then updating their code snippets or screenshots on drupal.org. Great idea. So Drupal CMS flashy new guide. I found it a big thing when Drupal CMS was released, but it's a start, right? We know we need to put more enforcing of documentation, but also Drupal Association had a few interesting initiatives like the sponsoring thing on the right-hand side. This hashtag documentation in Drupal Slack, I think it's underused a lot. I occasionally put the articles there up to review because I'm not maintainer of one of the guides. It's very hard to become maintainer of the guides on Drupal.org. It's an issue. But there's something that I'm slowly trying to weave through and make sure that other people won't get blocked by me. If I can't get access to become a maintainer, how come others would ever become a maintainer, or how we would actually keep the maintainers doing that? But hashtag documentation on Slack, if you're not there, jump on Drupal Slack, join in there, help us review some documentation. Symfony book, great example. Actually, there's a reference of the Drupal book somewhere here. I did screenshot. Yes, Drupal@yourfingertips.com. I haven't read it yet, but it's on my list. So there is a book there, but the best book I found, I helped translated it to Russian many years ago. Drupal Symfony Fast Track, I think one of the best books there, how to teach a framework to a person. Literally, it's very good. If you haven't checked it out, and even if you're a very good developer and know Symfony from back to front, just have a read. Like it's a good tutorial book. A Laravel documentation kind of sets the standard. They do spend a lot of time on their documentation before each release, and I find it's clean, it's nice, and it's not a bad example of how to do documentation. Again, framework versus not a framework, two different things. Still, the examples are out there. Number 5, reliance on generative tools, sometimes called intelligence. People say it's here to stay. In my personal opinion, it's not sustainable at the moment in perspective of teaching students, but I actually wasn't the one who actually was saying to students, stop, you can't use AI, you can't use ChatGPT. I actually was encouraging them to do it, and but I also was trying to educate them about what they're dealing with. G stands for generative. It's gonna generate things, right? How many using DrupalSouth? I asked yesterday, ChatGPT. The world contains 1 U, right? And then it goes into, I said, but are you sure? Therefore, the word DrupalSouth contains 1 U. Again, so when I ask, am I sure? And I said I counted 3 U's in DrupalSouth. And then it went into this philosophical rant, which is didn't do before. So they changed the model, and now it goes a bit more philosophical and says, in some perspective, it actually can be more than 1 U. Anyway, that's the tool you're dealing with. That's the limitations of the tool. So would you hire someone as your accountant who cannot count? Saying that, it's great in some things. Best example I saw, that's 2 years ago, again, not recent one, but 2 years ago. the kids couldn't figure out, I call them the kids, the students couldn't figure out how to use Visual Studio Code. In fact, the settings, if you go to PHP Store and Visual Studio Code, it's basically a forest that you can rarely get out of. And yeah, they just asked ChatGPT how to configure that. Then ChatGPT said, pop up. And that was the best example. I actually asked them to show it to the class, how to use generative tool. The worst example, tic-tac-toe. We were learning object-oriented development in C#. I asked class to create an interface, create a class, and the guy just was sitting there doing nothing. I asked him to show me. He showed the full tic-tac-toe with the interface inside the CLI. I was like, okay, show me your class. And he didn't know what to show me because he had no concept of what class was. Basically just asking ChatGPT to generate the thing. So if you're there to learn about object-oriented programming, don't learn entering into ChatGPT. That's kind of my thing. It was another good example when I said, well, you know, I'm not going to force you to learn about classes, but if you are here, I think you need to know about object-oriented technology rather than typing into ChatGPT. Few students put, like, when you ask something, ChatGPT, it goes, certainly. So few students copy-pasted the certainly and answered the assignments as well. That was hilarious. And security best practices, I saw it at the WordCamp conference and everything open. The generative tools are very bad in sanitizing. So I hear a lot of vibe coding these days where people go and create an app and put it into their medical practices within 3 months. Without reviewing things. Remember, security should be your standard, especially if you're dealing with customers' data. So when you're generating something, please do, but don't expose my data. Personal reflection. Tools are great from writing from scratch. In fact, tomorrow's session we will be upgrading Drupal 10 to Drupal 11 module Clam AV at 15-minute session. So if you want to see how that went, come and join me. Bad at analysis and refactoring. Very bad at refactoring. From what I saw. Again, this is a personal reference. Yep. Okay, so usually I ask a question, do I hire a software developer or prompt engineer? And that's the thing that we need to talk about. Again, I'm going to talk more about the AI tools tomorrow if you want to see. Ability to read code and errors. Again, as with book, it becomes an issue. But it's a revelation when you see a student who raises the hand and said, I have an error. And I said, what does error says? And they're like, I need to read it. I was like, well, exactly, that's your next step. You block yourself from the next step. Go and read an error and make sure it's actually you get better. And you'll see that people who actually read the errors next time, they might not go to straight away. They read an error and then they come to you and either say, I stuck, or they say, I actually read an error and I know how to fix it. So again, better at reading. It's a good practice. So sometimes before the class, I put code snippets or error snippets to show people what's wrong. In my NPM, I didn't run NPM install. Simple error, but you won't believe how many people just say, can't do anything. It doesn't work. Okay, recommendation, start lesson with a code analysis. Introduce and fund an error exercise. Read books if you can, or read stuff online. Group assignments. I found the best way to fight AI is group assignments. Get a piece of code, give it to 2 people, try to them to solve it. Again, a piece of code already have something, so it needs to be analyzed first. They can use AI tools all they want, but usually they would get the wrong answer in many cases. And also give them the real life examples like a first timers issues. Easy to get disconnected with the devices that we have, and again, make students talk to each other rather than ChatGPT. Pair programming. Pair programming is a skill, and really encouraged to do that. So recommendation, work in groups, pair programming, allow to review each other's work, and open source assignment. Use real life examples. I quickly gonna go through here. So there's a Tenders website in Queensland. There's a Tenders website in Victoria. There's Tenders website in Australia. So what I did the annual report for Great Barrier Reef, which is about 80-page document, and I asked them to learn WordPress and learn Drupal by just copying, pasting, and formatting different sides of the annual report to learn how to edit stuff in those content management systems. And it was great because you can't do that in AI, and also it gives you hands-on tools and comparison tools. For example, who can tell me what's better, like when comparing the tools? CK editor or Tiny editor when editing tables? You probably don't know, you never compare it. But you won't believe how easy it is in CK editor to edit tables and how hard it is to edit it in Tiny. Tiny is the core editor for WordPress. I didn't know that until we started doing it with students. So actually what students were doing, they were going to Drupal, creating a table, copying it from Drupal, pasting it into WordPress. No awareness of industry events, meetups, conferences. If you're mentoring someone, take them there. Ask them to go. If you are learning, check out meetup.com or other tools. Even Facebook these days has some events. Take them there. WordCamp and DDD conferences are great conferences because they're cheap, under $100. I know this conference can be steep. We do have students discount, but I still think as a student it would be very, very expensive for me. So Melbourne has a DDD conference, and it's really good. It is Microsoft oriented, but there's lots of great talks there. DrupalSouth, again, everything is recorded. Have a look after. Not the easiest task to sit through a lot of technical talks, but a great way to learn. Gaf hack. Form the team, do a bit of coding if you want. You don't have to be a coder. There is also project management and other roles. So make them be aware of there's things happening. I wish someone told me that when I started. I actually started my first meetup inside the company I was in back in 2006, 2007, because I didn't know that those events even existed back in the day. So recommendation, watch videos online, promote, attend meetups. Drupal meetups at the moment are here. We're trying to post all of them on drupalsouth.org. Presented meetups, really good way to start public speaking. Like literally 5 minutes. We're looking for people at WordPress at the moment in Brisbane to do 5-minute talks because we want them eventually to grow into good speakers. It's a great skill to have to teach your team. Volunteer at the conference is another thing. If you're a bit introverted, great way to start. All open source conferences and others are looking for local volunteers. Up-to-date portfolio, obviously keep your resume up. My advice is go and do the GitHub account and start looking at the code or commenting at the code or just asking questions. This is one book I recommend, The Power of One, although it does talk about like how shitty things in social media. It does look at it from the perspective of education. I found there's lots and lots of great quotes there. Really great book. Education-wise, we are on a way of actually losing a lot of higher education professionals because no one goes to do PhDs and stuff like that. So the future doesn't look very bright from an educational perspective. So, but from mentoring perspective, it doesn't have to be. Again, you don't have to do PhD, but you can be a good mentor. So let's summarize. For students, be curious, build your portfolio, get into open source and know your local events. For teachers and mentors, help you students with the new tools, discover new technologies or show how to use existing ones. Continue support for open source and attend local events. For my colleagues in IT and mentors, mentor more if you can. I mean, don't enforce it, obviously. But help, showcase your stuff, promote your skills, teach what would you like to be taught. That's the point why I started it. I asked myself a question, 20 years ago, what did I miss in uni that I really wanted to have? And promote local events. Again, big round of applause for volunteers and organizers. If you have any questions, I will be around whole conference. Come talk to me. I know it's morning tea now. I don't want to stand in between your coffee and you. But come and talk to me about those things. Come to my talk tomorrow, 15 minutes about how me and ChatGPT upgraded module to Drupal 11. And I hope, chat to you more. Thanks for coming.